Today, we're going to look at two laws that didn't just support a cruel system, they actively pushed the United States right to the brink of collapse. We're talking about the Fugitive Slave Acts, and they really were a critical breaking point in American history.
So let's just start with a really provocative question. What kind of law could actually force everyday people, even those who hated slavery, to become slave catchers themselves? The answer to that question gets to the very heart of this whole conflict.
To figure that out, we have to go back, way back, all the way to the U.S. Constitution itself. You see, the foundation for this entire struggle wasn't just some act of Congress. It was actually written into the nation's founding document as a really difficult, and as it turns out, fatal compromise. And the language in this clause, well, it's everything. It's known as the Fugitive Slave Clause, and what it meant, essentially, was that there was no such thing as a truly free state for an escaped person. It created a constitutional duty for states to return runaways, and that set the stage for decades of conflict.
Okay, so with that mandate in the Constitution, Congress decides it needs to make its first big attempt to enforce it. And that brings us to the very first Fugitive Slave Act, which was signed into law pretty early on in the country's history.
The 1793 law was chillingly simple. It basically gave a slave owner or their agent the power to just grab an alleged fugitive and drag them in front of a state judge. And here's the most important part. There was no jury trial. A single person could decide someone's entire fate, stripping them of one of the most basic legal rights.
But the North didn't just go along with it. Right away, many states started pushing back. They passed their own laws, called personal liberty laws, that flat out contradicted the federal act by guaranteeing things like jury trials. And all this opposition, while it also fueled the growth of the Underground Railroad, which became a much more organized network for helping people find freedom.
Now, this resistance in the North made the South absolutely furious. They demanded a new law, one with some real teeth. The result? The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. It was part of this bigger package called the Compromise of 1850. But this wasn't just a minor update. It was a massive, drastic escalation.
And this chart right here just lays it all out plain as day. Look how much more severe the 1850 law was. The power goes from state judges to new, powerful federal commissioners. The accused not only doesn't get a jury, now they can't even testify in their own defense. And the penalty for helping someone? It skyrockets to a $1,000 fine and 6 months in prison.
Just let that sink in for a moment. Imagine being accused, even if you were born a free person, and you are not allowed to say a single word in court to defend your own life and liberty. Your entire future decided without your voice ever being heard.
And if that wasn't bad enough, get this. The law created a corrupt financial incentive. A federal commissioner was paid double for siding with the slaveholder. They'd get $10 for sending someone back to slavery, but only $5 for setting them free. So the system wasn't just unjust, it was literally rigged from the start.
And this is the clause that gets back to our original question. The law commanded all good citizens to help capture fugitives. It turned the entire country, even free states, into a potential police force for slave owners. You could actually be penalized for refusing to help.
The federal government also made sure its own agents would toe the line. A federal marshal who refused to hunt down a fugitive could be fined $1,000, which back then was an enormous amount of money. The pressure to enforce this law, no questions asked, was immense.
But here's the thing about an iron-fisted approach like this. It had the exact opposite of its intended effect. Instead of protecting slavery and calming things down, the 1850 Act just backfired spectacularly. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire.
So by bringing the brutal reality of slavery right to the front door of northern communities, the law forced people to confront it, and it radicalized them. The abolitionist movement didn't just grow, it exploded. The Underground Railroad got more organized, more defiant. Northern states passed even stronger personal liberty laws. And in maybe the biggest irony of all, when the South eventually seceded, South Carolina actually cited the North's resistance to this very law as a reason for leaving the Union.
So the very act designed to preserve the Union by appeasing the South became one of the key grievances that tore it apart. It was a massive political miscalculation, proving that you just can't legislate away moral outrage.
The law's complete failure to hold the Union together ultimately sealed its own fate. And that brings us to the final chapter for these notorious laws, which came, no surprise, right in the middle of the Civil War.
This timeline gives you a really clear 71-year story arc. You start with the first law back in 1793, then the huge escalation in 1850,
You see it used to justify secession in 1860, and then, finally, its repeal in 1864.
And here's the final date. With the Civil War raging and the country being fundamentally changed, Congress finally abolished the Fugitive Slave Acts for good, closing one of the darkest legislative chapters in American history.
And that brings us right back to that central puzzle, doesn't it? How can a law meant to preserve unity become the very thing that shreds it to pieces? Well, the story of the Fugitive Slave Acts gives us a pretty stark answer. A compromise built on profound injustice isn't really a compromise at all. It's just a countdown to conflict.